The alarm on my wrist pulsed red before I even opened my eyes, and a voice from the embassy speaker was already calling my name. Daniel Cole, report to the atrium immediately. The signing cannot wait. I sat up in a strange bed, in a strange tower, on a planet that was not supposed to be my home, and I remembered exactly why my heart was pounding. In 1 hour, I was going to be married to a woman I had never spoken to, in order to stop a war that could erase every human being on Kesserine 4. There was no time to think about whether it was fair. There was only time to get dressed and walk into the biggest decision of my life. The colony of Kesserine 4 had been built by human hands only 12 years earlier, a small outpost on the edge of space, surrounded by 3 powerful alien nations who had been fighting each other for longer than humanity had existed. When our colony accidentally settled on land that all 3 of them claimed, we became the one thing every side agreed on hating. Fleets gathered above our sky. Warning messages arrived every day. My father, the administrator of the colony, spent months trying to find any way to keep our people alive. He found one. The Sevrathi, the strongest and most disciplined of the 3 powers, offered peace under one condition: a binding marriage between a human representative and a noble of their empire, to tie our 2 peoples together in blood and law. My father signed the treaty without asking me, because there was no time left to ask, and because the alternative was watching our colony burn. I found out I was the human representative 3 days before the wedding. I was 26 years old, an engineer who had spent his whole life fixing broken machines, not fixing broken governments. I had never held a position of power. I had never wanted one. But my father's name was on the signature line, and the treaty said the representative had to share his blood, so it had to be me. The bride was named Ithara Velson, daughter of the Sevrathi war marshal who commanded the very fleet sitting above our heads. Her father was the reason half our colony had spent the last month sleeping in shelters. I hated the idea of marrying his daughter before I even met her. The atrium of the embassy tower was filled with light from 3 suns, and cameras from every allied station were already recording when I arrived. The Sevrathi delegation stood on one side, tall and silver-skinned, their eyes calm in a way that felt almost inhuman. On the other side stood our small human delegation, faces tired from months of fear. Between them stood Ythara. She was taller than me, with skin that shimmered faintly like moonlight on water, and patterns beneath her skin that shifted color the way human cheeks might flush. Her eyes were a pale gold, sharp and unreadable. She wore ceremonial armor instead of a wedding dress, a detail that told me everything about how her people viewed this event. It was not a celebration, it was a treaty made flesh. We stood face to face while an elder spoke words in a language I barely understood, a mix of formal Sevrathi and translated human vows. I repeated what I was told to repeat. She did the same. Neither of us looked at the other with anything close to warmth. When it was finished, the room erupted into polite applause that felt colder than silence. Officials shook hands. Reporters whispered into their recorders. My father caught my eye from across the room, his face full of an apology he could never say out loud. I did not feel married. I felt sentenced. They gave us a suite at the top of the embassy tower, a room with a curved window looking out over the twin moons of Kesserine, and they left us there, as if solitude would somehow turn strangers into a couple. The door closed behind the last guard, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. I walked to the window and crossed my arms, staring out at the moons because it was easier than looking at her. "You did not want this," she said. Her voice was steady, low, careful, like she was measuring every word before she let it out. I did not answer right away. When I finally spoke, my voice came out sharper than I meant it to. "Does it matter what I wanted? Neither of us had a choice in this." "No," she agreed. "But I have studied your species before this arrangement was announced. Humans are known for resisting things they do not agree with. You argue, you push back, you break what does not fit you. Yet you have said almost nothing since the ceremony began." I almost laughed at that, a bitter kind of laugh that never made it past my throat. "What am I supposed to say? That I am happy? That I am grateful? My people signed my life away to stop your father's fleet from destroying our colony. Forgive me if I am not in the mood for conversation." Something shifted in her expression, so subtle I almost missed it. The patterns beneath her skin dimmed slightly, turning from a pale blue to something closer to gray. "My father is the reason your colony is still standing," she said quietly. "He could have ordered the attack a dozen times over the last year. He did not, because he believed peace was possible. This marriage was his idea, not mine. I did not choose you any more than you chose me." That surprised me enough to finally turn and look at her directly. "Your father proposed this?" "He did. He believes that blood ties are stronger than any signed paper. Our people have ended 3 wars this way in the last 1,000 years. It has always worked before." "Worked," I repeated. "As in, forced 2 strangers together and called it peace. As in, built something lasting out of something that began as necessity," she corrected. "I did not say it would be comfortable. I said, it has worked." We stood there for a while, the tension in the room thick enough to touch, 2 people who had just been legally bound together without either of us agreeing to want it. I studied her face, trying to see the daughter of a war marshal, trying to see an enemy, but all I found was someone standing very straight, the way people stand when they are trying not to show how tired they are. "Do you hate this as much as I do?" I finally asked. She considered the question longer than I expected. "I do not hate you," she said. "I do not know you. That is different from hate. What I feel is closer to fear, though my people are taught never to admit such things aloud." "Fear of what?" "Of failing my father, of failing my people, of standing here, bound to a stranger, and discovering that even this sacrifice was not enough to stop the war everyone is so afraid of." Her honesty caught me off guard. I had expected pride, or coldness, or the practiced calm every Severthy diplomat wore like armor. Instead, I was looking at someone as frightened as I was, just better at hiding it. "I am afraid too," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I have spent my whole life fixing machines. I do not know the first thing about diplomacy, or treaties, or keeping a marriage that was written into a legal document instead of chosen by 2 hearts. Then perhaps," she said, "we are more alike than either of us expected." The silence that followed was different from the one before. Less sharp, less like a wall between us, and more like a bridge neither of us had built on purpose. She walked closer, slowly, the way I would later learn was deliberate among her people, because sudden movement could be read as either aggression or fear, and she wanted neither. The patterns beneath her skin shifted again, this time toward a soft violet, a color I did not yet understand, but would later learn, meant something like nervous honesty. "If this marriage must be real in the eyes of the council," she said, "then let it at least be honest between us. I do not ask for love. I ask only that we do not lie to each other about what this is. I could have stepped back. I could have kept the distance, kept the anger, kept telling myself that this was nothing more than a political trap I had been forced into. But something about the way she stood there, offering honesty instead of pretending everything was fine, made all of that harder to hold on to. "What is this then?" I asked quietly, "if not a trap?" "Perhaps a beginning," she said, "or perhaps only 2 people trying to survive the same storm. I do not know yet. But I would rather face it with truth than silence." She stopped close enough that I could see the fine detail in the patterns on her skin, could hear the quiet steadiness of her breathing, could feel the entire weight of the last 3 days pressing down on both of us in that one small space between 2 strangers, who were legally supposed to be everything to each other. I did not step back. The anger that had carried me through the ceremony, through the cameras, through the cold applause, began to fade into something quieter, something closer to the fear she had just admitted to feeling herself. We were both trapped by the same treaty, both carrying the weight of people who depended on us, both standing in a room designed to turn strangers into partners overnight. Whatever this was, it did not feel like the political nightmare I had built up in my mind on the walk to the atrium that morning. It felt like 2 people finally being honest for the first time all day. I do not know how long we stood there, close enough that neither of us needed to raise our voices, far enough that either of us could still have walked away. But neither of us did. The city outside kept moving, the moons kept their slow orbit, and somewhere far above the tower, the Severthy fleet remained anchored in silent judgment over a peace that still had not proven itself. None of that mattered inside that room, not for those few minutes. What mattered was that for the first time since my name had been called that morning, I was not thinking about treaties, or fleets, or my father's guilty face across the atrium. I was thinking about her. When morning came, the light through the curved window was soft and gold, and for a moment I forgot where I was. Then I remembered everything at once: the ceremony, the vows, the strange quiet understanding that had passed between us the night before, and I realized that something fundamental had shifted in me that I could not undo. Ithara was already awake, standing by the window, watching the same moons I had stared at the night before as a stranger. She turned when she heard me stir, and the patterns beneath her skin brightened slightly, a pale blue that I was beginning to recognize as something like calm. "The council will summon us within the hour," she said. "My father will want proof that the arrangement has taken hold. Your people will want the same." I sat up, running a hand through my hair, trying to organize the storm of thoughts in my head. "And what will we tell them?" I asked. She considered the question, walking slowly toward the bed, her expression unreadable in the way it had been at the ceremony, though I was starting to notice the small differences now, the way her eyes softened just slightly when she looked at me. "We will tell them the truth," she said, "that we did not choose each other, but we chose to try. That is more than most arrangements like this are ever given." It was strange how quickly the world outside that room came rushing back once we opened the door. Guards saluted. Officials waited with tablets full of schedules. My father stood near the elevator, his face a careful mixture of hope and worry, searching my expression for any sign of how the night had gone. I gave him a small nod, nothing more, but it seemed to be enough. Some of the tension left his shoulders. The council meeting that followed was long and filled with careful words from both sides, discussions of border rights, resource sharing, military withdrawal schedules. I understood perhaps half of what was said, but I noticed that whenever a human representative spoke, Ithara listened closely, occasionally leaning toward me to explain a term or a custom I did not understand. And whenever a Sevrathi official raised a difficult point, I found myself doing the same for her, translating not language but intention, helping her read the worry behind human faces the way she had been reading Sevrathi calm for me. We were not diplomats. We were not experts in treaties, or fleets, or ancient customs, but somewhere in that long meeting, surrounded by people who still did not fully trust each other, we became something neither side had expected: a working partnership, not perfect, not without tension, but real. Ithara's father arrived on the final day of the summit, a tall figure whose presence silenced the room the moment he entered. His eyes found his daughter first, then moved to me, sharp and evaluating in a way that made my pulse quicken despite myself. "You have done what 100 years of failed treaties could not," he said, his voice deep and measured. "You have made two enemies listen to each other." "It was not us alone," Ithara said, standing straighter under her father's gaze. "It was the willingness to be honest, even when honesty was difficult." Her father studied me for a long moment, and I forced myself to meet his eyes without flinching, remembering everything Ithara had told me about how her people read strength and fear. "You are not what I expected from a human representative," he finally said. "I am not entirely sure what you expected, sir," I answered carefully. "Something weaker," he admitted. "Something easily controlled. Instead, I find someone willing to stand beside my daughter rather than simply beside a treaty. That is rare. That is valuable." The negotiations that followed moved faster after that. Fleets began to withdraw to safer distances. Resource agreements were signed without the usual arguments. Colonists who had spent months sleeping in shelters finally began to return to their homes, their fears slowly replaced by cautious hope. None of it happened because a piece of paper had bound two strangers together. It happened because two strangers had chosen, in a quiet room on the first night of an arrangement neither of us wanted, to be honest with each other instead of bitter. Weeks later, standing on the balcony of the same embassy tower where everything had begun, I watched the twin moons rise together over a colony that was finally, truly at peace. Ithara stood beside me, her hand resting lightly against mine, the patterns beneath her skin glowing a steady, warm blue. "I did not expect this," I admitted, watching the light shift across the sky. "Neither did I," she said, "but I am glad it happened this way." I thought about the anger I had carried into that first night, the fear, the certainty that nothing good could come from a marriage built on necessity instead of choice. All of that had been real, but so was this, standing beside someone who had once been a stranger and was now the person I trusted most in a galaxy full of danger. The war that had almost destroyed our colony was over, not because of fleets or fear, but because two people had chosen honesty over distance on a night neither of us had wanted to face. And whatever came next, whatever challenges still waited for a human and a Sevrathi bound together by treaty, and, now, by something far stronger than paper, I knew we would face it exactly the way we had faced that first impossible night. Together,